She was left hanging for stealing bread until the widowed rancher cut the rope and said, "Eat first." Wyoming Territory, December 1872. The snowstorm outside roared like a beast. Wind screamed through the cracks of the abandoned church, pushing the splintered doors inward. Each gust carried flakes of ice that scattered across the rotted floorboards, blanketing the altar and pews like cold ash. Inside, the crowd gathered, faces hard as stone, eyes hollowed by hunger and suspicion, their breath fogged in the frozen air as they stood around a crude gallows built beneath the warped wooden cross that once stood for salvation. At the center of it all stood a girl, barely 20, her hands bound tight behind her back with rough hemp. Her wrists were red and raw, blood seeping where the rope had bitten into flesh during the long drag through snow and dirt. Her hair, once a soft ash blonde, hung in frozen clumps around her face. Her feet were bare, toes bruised and purple from the cold. She shivered violently, but her jaw stayed clenched. A man stepped forward from the mob and hurled a broken loaf of bread at her. It struck her cheek and split in two, scattering across the floor. "She stole from our stores," he shouted. "A thief eats while we starve." "Hang her! Hang her!" others echoed. A woman pushed through, her eyes wild with grief. "My mother starved last week. She died with nothing in her belly but snow. This girl takes what wasn't hers. Let her swing for it." Their anger rolled like thunder. The air stung with more than cold. It wire of desperation. An elderly priest stepped toward the altar, the book of holy words trembling in his hands. His beard was frostbitten and his eyes rimmed red, but instead of opening the Bible, he snapped it shut. "I will not bless this girl," he declared. "What she stole was not just bread, it was from the mouths of our children." Eloise opened her lips to speak, but a rough hand stuffed a rag into her mouth. She gagged, eyes burning, tears threatened, but none fell. Then came the rope. They looped it around her neck, coarse hemp against pale skin. She flinched as the noose bit in, drawing a hiss of pain. The executioner placed his boot on the edge of the trap plank, ready to kick it free. The crowd hushed, breath held. Eloise looked up, her eyes, wide and stormy, scanned the faces that had once ignored her, now eager to see her die. But she didn't beg, didn't scream. She stood, trembling, and waited. The doors of the church slammed open with a violent crack. Snow poured in, swirling like a summoned ghost. A figure appeared, tall, heavy-coated, head bowed beneath a snow-drenched brim. Clay Mathisi stepped inside. He didn't speak. He didn't rush forward. He didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he removed his hat, brushed off the snow, and placed it gently on the nearest pew as if he were arriving for Sunday worship. The room fell silent. He looked at Eloise, really looked, not with pity, not with doubt, with recognition. She was starving, that much was obvious, and she was young, too young to have become this town's example. He walked to the altar where the rotted cross leaned sideways, bent by years of neglect. Clay paused, then straightened it with quiet care. Wood groaned, settling upright. No one dared breathe. A young man stepped into his path, blocking the stairs. "You ain't got the right," the boy stammered. Clay didn't raise his voice. "Step aside. I'm cold and I don't want to do what I used to do." The boy backed away like he'd seen a ghost. Clay climbed the steps. He didn't yell, didn't deliver a sermon. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of wet hair behind Eloise's ear, brushing it from her cheek. Her eyes widened in confusion. The touch was kind. Then he drew a long, glinting knife from his belt. One slice clean. The rope fell. Eloise collapsed, gasping. Clay caught her before her head hit the ground. He reached into his coat and pulled out a loaf of soft bread, wrapped in cloth still warm. He placed it in her trembling hands. Then for the first time, he spoke. "If someone's starve is justice," he said, voice low but clear, "then you've all forgotten what a sin really is." He stood. The crowd said nothing. They weren't afraid of his hands. They feared the look in his eyes, the look of a man who'd buried his wife with his own 2 hands, who knew what it meant to lose everything, and who no longer cared what anyone thought. No one moved. Clay bent down, cradled Eloise in his arms, and walked out into the storm. Snow muffled every sound as Clay rode, cradling Eloise against his chest. The mare moved steady through the back trail, away from the main road, away from judgmental eyes. Clay's jaw was clenched, his coat damp with melting snow. Eloise, limp in his arms, stirred only once. "Why did you do it?" she whispered, lips cracked. Alay said nothing. He pulled a wool cloak tighter around her, nudged the horse forward. They rode for miles in silence. By the time the cabin came into view, a squat, timbered shape tucked beneath a hill. The sky had turned the color of steel. Smoke rose from the chimney, faint but warm. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and iron. Clay kicked the door shut behind him, shook the snow from his coat, and carried Eloise to a chair by the hearth. Her fingers twitched from the sudden warmth. She looked around, blinking. The place was clean, spare, a shelf of books, a patched quilt folded neat on a cedar chest, 2 chairs at the table, only one worn from use, the other dust-covered. "You live alone," she murmured. Clay did not answer. His glance toward the dusty chair was brief, but it said more than words. He moved to the stove, stirred something in a pot, beans, carrots, bone talk. When it was hot, he ladled it into a bowl, broke the remaining bread in half, and set it before her. No questions, no conditions. Eloise hesitated, then she ate. At first, she trembled from hunger, then she wept. Not loud, just silent tears falling onto the edge of the bowl. When her hands slowed, Clay pushed the rest of the bread toward her. She stared at him, startled. "I already ate," he said. She knew he was lying. Afterward, she wrapped the cloak tighter, eyes tracking the firelight flickering across the wooden beams. Her voice was small but steady now. "You think I'm innocent?" Clay sat across from her, arms resting on his knees. He didn't look at her when he replied. "I think nobody risks their life for bread unless they need it bad." She bit her lip, uncertain. "You're not afraid people will say you brought me back for something else?" Clay's gaze stayed on the flames. "I lost my wife to talk like that. I have nothing left to lose." The words hung between them. Later, Clay brought a pillow and blanket. "You take the bed." She sat up, alarmed. "But why are you being this kind?" "I'm not worth. I once left someone behind," he said simply. "Someone I should have saved. I'm not making that mistake again." He opened a drawer, pulled out a wooden comb, and placed it on the nightstand, then turned away, pretending not to see the tears start again. The bed was soft, the fire warm. Eloise lay staring at the ceiling, arms folded across her chest, like she expected a rope to tighten there. She glanced to the floor. Clay lay on his side, back to the fire, a knife gripped in his sleeping hand, ready for ghosts or men. Eloise pulled the covers higher. "I do not want to trust you," she whispered into the dark. "But I hope I can." Outside, snow fell. Inside, the noose no longer had a neck to. Claim. Morning light seeped through the frostbitten window. Eloise shot upright, breath caught in her throat. Then she remembered, no rope around her neck, no crowd, just warmth and the heavy hush of a house still waking. Beside the bed sat a small wooden tray, a bowl of warm oats, a steaming cup of tea, and a folded note in careful handwriting. "If you need me, I'm at the stable, see?" She picked it up, touched the ink, still fresh. He had written it just hours ago before dawn. No one had ever done something like that for her. The house was quiet, wrapped in soft creaks and the distant rustle of wind. She wandered through it slowly, passing a bookshelf lined with dog-eared paperbacks, a table with hand-stitched linen. Near the door hung a pair of worn women's boots. She froze in front of a comb resting on a shelf. It was carved wood, delicate, with an L burned into its side. She reached out, then pulled her hand back, like the object might break under her touch. It was not hers, not meant for her. Still, she stood there a long moment. At noon, they ate together at the table. Clay placed 2 bowls down, sat without a word. Eloise ate quietly, then set her spoon aside. I didn't steal that bread for myself, she said. Clay did not look up, just gave a small nod, waiting. There's a boy, she continued, voice uneven. Lives under the bridge, 6 years old. His mother froze to death. I saw him, licking snow, trying to trick his belly. Clay looked at her then, eyes steady. I begged the bakery, she said. They told me to get out. I only took 1 loaf, just 1, but they said I took 100. Her fingers twisted in her lap. I knew what they'd do to me. I just couldn't go back to him empty-handed. Silence followed, thick and real. Clay reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a hard crust of bread, and placed it between them. After lunch, he said, I'll show you how to split wood, not 'cause I want help, but so your hands can grip reins when you ride away from here one day. She stared at her hands, still raw, bruised. Then she touched the bread and cried for the first time in weeks. That evening, Clay left a folded wool cloak on the bed. It's yours now, he said when she looked at him in surprise. She opened her mouth to thank him, but he spoke first. I once left someone, he said quietly. When she needed me most, I won't do that again. Eloise didn't answer. She understood. As Clay turned to leave, he paused at the door. That boy, he's still alive, right? Eloise smiled faintly. You think I'd tell that story if he weren't? The fire was low when morning came. Clay stepped into the cold, boots crunching snow. When he returned, the cabin was quiet, empty. His stomach turned. He moved fast, but stopped when he saw the folded slip on the table. Went to gather wood. Water's boiling. Don't let it spill, E, he read it twice. Then, for the first time in years, Clay Mathesy smiled, and behind him, the kettle began to sing. Northeastern Territory, late winter, 1883. The wind sliced through the valley with a hollow cry, rattling the loose planks of the half-collapsed barn. Clay and Eloise stood on the icy roof beams, struggling to secure a tarp over the gaping hole. Snowflakes clung to their sleeves, melting into the worn wool. A horse's hooves crunched into the frost-hardened earth below. Clay squinted down. Amos Grick, hut low. Scarf pulled tight, rode into view, his expression shadowed with unease. No rifle slung across his saddle. Just a bundle tied behind him, and news written clear across his furrowed brow. Town stirring, he called up. Word is Clay Mathesy is harboring a bread thief. Some folk want a citizen's tribunal. Clay didn't move. He secured the final rope knot and tossed the tarp edge over. I harbor a person, he said, brushing snow from his gloves. Not a crime. Amos gave a wary nod, then reached into his saddlebag. This came for the girl from the old bakery. Said it's for the little ash-haired girl. Thought you'd want to see it first. He handed over a paper-wrapped bundle, still warm beneath the waxed parchment. Inside, nestled beneath a fresh loaf, was a folded note. Delicate handwriting scrolled in haste. Eloise unfolded it slowly. I know who really stole the bread. It was the mayor's son. He made me stay quiet. Be careful. M.G. Her breath hitched. Her fingers clenched the note tight, turning her knuckles white. Not for herself. Not anymore. She feared what might happen to Clay now for choosing to shield her. Amos tipped his hat. Be careful, Mathesy. When he rode off, Clay entered the cabin, walked to the gun rack, and unhooked the rifle without a word. Eloise watched, heart pounding. What are you going to do? He checked the chamber calmly. Make sure they do not make the same mistake twice. His voice wasn't angry, just steady, worn thin with memory. She realized then it wasn't just about her. This was about someone else the town had judged and broken, someone Clay hadn't saved in time. The days that followed moved slower. Clay showed her how to pack a saddlebag, how to brace flint in the wind. He never raised his voice, never gave orders. Eloise listened, learned. When he gashed his palm, splitting wood, she rushed inside, grabbed cloth, then hesitated. Her eyes fell on the old rope tucked behind the door, the one that had bound her wrists weeks ago. She cut a strip from it, clean and careful, then wrapped his hand. Her fingers trembled. Old things, she murmured. New uses. Clay met her gaze. He said nothing, but his silence held weight. That evening, snow rolled in again. The wind howled and the sky turned iron gray. Clay stood outside the barn, smoking. The faint orange glow of the cigarette tip was the only warmth in the scene. Eloise approached with a tin cup of tea. It's getting colder. He took the cup, nodding, thanks. A gust kicked up flakes, and Clay narrowed his eyes toward the dark ridgeline. "Storm's coming in next week," he murmured. "We'll need to seal the windows tighter." Eloise wrapped her shawl tighter, then said quietly, "If it storms, I won't be leaving." He looked at her. For the first time, she saw something vulnerable in his eyes. Not hardness, not sorrow, but belief. She had chosen to stay, and for the first time in a long while, he let himself hope. The winter of reckoning. The wind never stopped. It scraped against the cabin walls like claws, as if the land itself knew something was coming. Late winter, Clay's homestead. The wind howled endlessly, shaking the shutters and piling snow deep along the cabin's walls. Outside, the path had vanished beneath a sea of white. Inside, the world shrank to the crackle of fire, the creak of wooden floors, and the faint click of a sewing needle. Eloise sat near the hearth, mending Clay's wool sweater. Her fingers moved carefully, tugging purple thread through frayed seams, lavender soft and faded. She had not meant to choose that color. It simply felt right. Across the room, Clay knelt beside the stove, tightening the bent hook that held their cooking pot. Neither spoke of the townspeople, of justice or guilt. The silence was not avoidance. It was permission to breathe, if only for a little while. Clay glanced at the stitching. His gaze lingered. He knew that color. He said nothing. Later, the fire burned low, and their shadows danced against the walls. Clay poured tea and leaned back against the hearthstones. His voice was quiet, shaped by years of things left unsaid. "Her name was Lena, my wife." Eloise didn't interrupt. She had a soft laugh. Never raised her voice, not even when folks started talking. They said she was pregnant with another man's child. I didn't believe them, but I didn't stop them either. He stared into the flames. She caught the fever that winter. I sat with her for days, but the town never sent a doctor. Said it wasn't right, not after what they heard. He paused. She died without hearing me say I believed her. I buried her under the cottonwood by the creek, alone, H. Eloise reached for her cup. Her fingers trembled slightly. "If you hadn't walked into that church," she said softly, "I'd have been the second woman you left behind." Their eyes met. There was no accusation in her voice, only truth. Clay reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he touched her without need or urgency, just presence. Not romance, something heavier, a quiet vow not to turn away again. That night, sleep would not come. Eloise wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. The snow danced in the moonlight, gentle and silver, settling into her hair like whispers. Clay followed a moment later, wordless. He draped a blanket across her shoulders and stood beside her. They said nothing. The silence stretched, and then he spoke, not to break it, but to give it meaning. "I do not know what tomorrow brings," he said, "but if you stay, I will not let you go hungry. I will not let you be alone." Eloise turned to him. "Is that a promise?" He looked at her, steady and solemn. "It is the only thing I am sure of." They stood there until the cold kissed their skin raw, then turned and walked inside together. The fire welcomed them back. Soup bubbled quietly on the stove. 2 chairs waited at the table, and where once there had been dust, now lay a folded wool blanket. Lavender thread still caught in its weave. The past had not returned, but something else had taken root. A presence, a choice, and maybe in time a home. The winter of reckoning. The wind never stopped. It scraped against the cabin walls like claws, as if the land itself knew something was coming. Eloise had not slept. She sat curled in Clay's worn armchair, the purple-threaded blanket pulled to her chin. Her fingers trembled around the note she had read 100 times. When Clay stirred, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor, she looked up, her face pale. "I need to tell you everything." He didn't speak, just waited. She handed him the letter. "It's from Mary Grace." He read it in silence, then read it again. "She says the mayor's son, Bennett Dalton, was the one who stole the bread, that he threatened her if she spoke up." Eloise swallowed hard. "I took 1 loaf for a starving child, but someone took 100, and they blamed me because I was easy alone." Her voice cracked. "If I speak now, they'll say I'm lying to save myself. And if they come after me again, they might come after you too." Clay folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table. "Last time I stayed silent," he said softly. "Someone died." He looked her straight in the eye. This time if it costs me something, then it does. But no one else will die, because I was too much a coward. That afternoon they rode through fresh snow to the edge of town, stopping at the grand white house of Mayor Dalton. The porch lamps flickered in the wind. A servant opened the door, but stepped aside when Clay's eyes met his. Inside, the mayor's study was warm and lined with books. Dalton himself stood behind a polished desk, his smile tight. "You brought her here," he said, voice dripping with disdain. Clay laid the note on the desk. Dalton read it, then scoffed. "This proves nothing. Scribbles from a maid who barely writes her own name. And this girl, this criminal, you expect me to believe her?" "Mary was your wife's niece," Eloise said. "She wouldn't lie." "She was the kitchen help," Dalton snapped. "And you know better." Then a door slammed open. Bennett Dalton strode in tall, smirking. "Well, well," he drawled. "The lives. Thought we fixed that problem." Clay's fists tightened. "Easy," Bennett sneered. "You wouldn't want to hurt the mayor's boy." Clay's voice dropped. "I used to be afraid of what would happen if I acted. Now I only regret not acting sooner." His words hit like a crack of thunder. They left without another word. Dalton did not follow. That night the storm thickened. Clay stepped into the barn, checking on the newborn colt when the blow came from behind. He hit the ground hard, dazed. Before he could rise, booted feet surrounded him. 4 masked men. One raised a pipe. Another kicked him in the ribs. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Inside the house, Eloise heard something. A muffled thud. A shout cut short. She grabbed the oil lantern and ran into the blizzard. The barn door swung open in the wind. "Clay!" she shouted. The lantern cast long shadows. She saw him on the ground, bloodied, unmoving. One of the men raised a knife. No, she hurled the lantern. It shattered against the wall, flames leaping up in wild tongues. The men turned in panic. She grabbed the hatchet by the woodpile and charged. It struck one of them square in the shoulder. "Do not touch him!" she screamed. The man howled, falling back. Another lunged. Clay surged up, pain forgotten, and swung hard. His fist connected with a jaw, then another. Bennett appeared, stumbling out from behind the hay bales, face twisted in shock. Clay grabbed him by the coat, slammed him to the floor, and wrenched his arm back until something snapped. "You think I wouldn't come for you?" Clay snarled. They bound him with rope. That rope, the one once meant for Eloise's neck. Before dawn, Clay and Eloise rode again. Through the dark, through the cold. She walked beside the horse, holding the letter, eyes fixed ahead. Clay sat straight in the saddle. Bennett slumped and bloodied before him, tied to the beast like a criminal from an old legend. Snow lashed their faces. Ice cracked beneath their boots, but they didn't stop, not until the town lights flickered ahead, and this time they would not be silent. The cold dawn broke with a sharp wind. Snow drifted like ash from a sky choked with silence. Clay stepped into the square with slow, deliberate steps. Bennett Dalton slumped over the saddle before him, hands still bound by the rope that once marked another fate. His face was bloodied, swollen, his pride shattered. Eloise walked beside them, in her hand the note from Mary Grace. The proof, the weight. They reached the old church. Clay strode to the bell and rang it. 3 loud tolls that echoed through the streets like gunshots. Windows opened, doors creaked, faces emerged, wrapped in coats and scarves, curiosity pulling them from warm hearths to cold stone. The churchyard filled. No one spoke. On the steps, Clay pushed Bennett to his knees. The snow turned pink beneath him. Eloise faced the crowd, chin high, voice clear. "You once hung a rope around my neck without proof, without mercy. You said I stole what I never touched." She held up the letter. "Now I bring the truth." A murmur swept through the gathering. From the back, a young woman stepped forward. Her coat was threadbare, hands trembling, but her voice steady. "I am Mary Grace," she said. "I worked in the bakery. I saw Bennett take the keys to the storeroom. I heard him threaten to ruin my family if I spoke. Gasps, whispers. I wrote this," she continued, showing the original letter, "and I brought something else." From her satchel, she pulled a tattered ledger, the bakery's account book. "Look here," she said, flipping to a page. A shortage of 100 loaves, noted the same day Bennett was seen near the storeroom. She looked directly at the mayor. I was silent too long, but I will not stay quiet while good people suffer for others' sins. The square trembled with reaction. Old men shook their heads. A woman clutched her child tighter. An elder muttered aloud, his voice cracking, "We almost killed a girl for what a rich man's son did." Clay stepped back. He said nothing, but the words had already ignited something. The old priest came forward, walking slowly through the crowd. His breath fogged before him as he looked at Eloise. "I did not pray for you once," he said, voice heavy with remorse, "but today I kneel." And he did, right there in the snow. The crowd shifted. Mayor Dalton stepped forward, red-faced, voice strained. "There is no proof," Bennett ordered violence. "These are words, accusations." Clay's voice rang cold and clear. "You want proof?" He held up Bennett's glove, still damp, the knuckles crusted in dried blood. "I pulled this off him after he tried to stab me in the dark." Clay stepped closer. "Want me to show them what's underneath?" The mayor fell silent. A murmur rose, growing into something more: anger, disbelief, shame. A middle-aged woman shouted, "Get them out of our town!" Others joined in. "Resign, send them packing, let justice breathe for once." The vote was not formal, but it was final. By sundown, Bennett was carried out of town under guard, his hands still bound. The mayor, pale and silent, resigned before nightfall. The wind eased as if the land had been holding its breath and could now exhale. Clay stood on the church steps, eyes on the crowd dispersing. Eloise came to his side. "Is it over now?" she asked, voice low. Clay looked at her, and for the first time the fight left his face. "For them," he said, "maybe." Then he turned to her. "But for me it is only just beginning. Early spring Wyoming territory. The snow had not vanished, but it had retreated. At Clay Matthes's homestead, green broke through the earth like cautious promises. Rows of spring vegetables lined the newly dug garden beds, and chickens clucked behind a tidy fence. Laughter echoed faintly from behind the cabin. Eloise sat beneath the porch awning, reading aloud to 3 children cross-legged in the grass. Her voice, once sharp with survival, now softened with patience. A boy with wind-blown hair stepped forward after the lesson ended. In his hands, a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "It's not to say sorry," he mumbled. "It's so you have something good to share." Eloise took it gently. "That's a kind reason," she said. "Thank you." Inside, the cabin had changed too. No longer a place of ghosts, it was a place of work, of warmth, of second chances. On the wall above the hearth, the locket that once belonged to Clay's wife now hung beside a new embroidered cloth, stitched in lavender thread. That night, after the children had gone and the chickens had roosted, Clay sat at the table with a pen and a sheet of parchment. He wrote in silence, "Lena, I failed you once. I let fear speak louder than love. I did not fight for you, and I paid for that in years. But there was a girl in the snow. I stepped forward this time. I am not writing to say I have found peace, only that I am learning how to keep someone alive, not just safe. Wherever you are, thank you for teaching me what love is, even if I only understood it too late." He folded the letter and walked to the peach tree near the porch, the one she had planted the year they married. The blossoms were just beginning to bud. He dug a small hole and buried the note at its roots. "Rest," he whispered. The next afternoon, he stood in front of a weathered wooden sign, freshly restored and nailed to a post by the gate. Eloise came to his side, brushing sawdust from her palms. She read the words aloud. "Mathesi Ranch, where no one goes hungry, where rope is for horses only." She smiled. Clay, still staring at the sign, said quietly, "If you still want to leave, I won't stop you." Eloise leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. You once promised not to let me die of cold hunger or loneliness, she said. I think you are keeping that promise. And quite well. They stood there beneath a sky no longer grey. The wind was still sharp, but it carried the scent of something new. That night they ate at the small wooden table. 2 chairs, 2 people. The fire crackled steadily. On the mantel, a loaf of warm bread waited, not stolen, not hoarded, but made with hands that no longer trembled. And outside the door, beneath the last melting snow, the first blade of grass pushed through, green, brave, and untouched by judgment. Spring had come. Thank you for riding with us through the frost and fire if she was left hanging for stealing bread until the widowed rancher cut the rope and said, "Eat first." If this story stirred your heart, if it reminded you that even in the harshest winters of life, kindness can thaw what judgment tried to freeze, then don't ride off just yet. Hit that hype button, subscribe to Western Tales, and saddle up for more tales of love that defied the law, bullets, and time itself. Until next time, remember, in the Wild West, bullets missed, but hearts didn't.